Hello everyone, it's Jay, and today I'm going to be talking about how 3 6 Mafia created Suicide Boys and also a different genre. Now, I know I'm gonna get some hate because Suicide Boys has their own little success, but if it wasn't for the Mafia, then we wouldn't have these artists today. But before I get started, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and with that out of the way, let's go. So starting out with how the 3 6 Mafia was formed. DJ Paul, who was an up-and-coming artist in the late 80s in Memphis, Tennessee, wanted to push the envelope more in something he was already a part of with Lord Infamous. This is pretty much known as Horrorcore. This is basically where Horrorcore started. Not Horrorcore, but Horrorcore. He soon found Juicy J, who was also another DJ in the underground scene, and the three together, Paul, J, and Infamous, formed 3 6 Mafia in 1991. This then created the actual genre Horrorcore. Now, this genre is similar to what we hear with Suicide Boys today. There wasn't much horrorcore going on in the 90s, which is probably why it flopped and didn't revive itself until, the late 2010s. Of course, we had Ghetto Boys with their single Mind Playing Tricks on Me.
Candlesticks in the dark, visions of bodies being burned.
And we also had Dr. Dre and his production skills in gangster rap, which had a darker tone as well. I mean, just listen to Murder Was the Case.
I stopped breathing, damn, I see demons.
But there was no artist to push the envelope of dark satanic rap other than 3 6 Mafia themselves. Like I said, horrorcore itself never really took off in the 90s. The success of gangster rap that Dre had created had overpowered the whole dynamic of rap and changed it a lot. And so horrorcore itself never really caught on. Nobody really understood what it was. I would say their biggest turning point for 3 6 Mafia to put horrorcore on the map was whenever Who Run It came out in the late 90s. It had that gangster rap feel, but it also had the Crunkcore inspiration that Lil Jon would eventually take the spotlight for a few years later. Eventually, 3 6 Mafia would capitalize off of gangster rap and change their whole dynamic of sound. This, in return, pushed bangers like Who I Is, which was also on the Saints Row 1 game, Poppin' My Collar, and Stay Fly. Horrorcore itself died down a bit and the push for Crunkcore became mainstream, I guess because it was just less, dark and satanic. Crunkcore always had that goofy sound, but it was still gangster rap in the background, so, it was definitely different and it definitely made waves. But if it wasn't for 3 6 Mafia and making Who Run It, then Crunkcore probably would have never existed in the early 2000s. Now, there is some misinformation about the release date of Who Run It online, and on Google it says 2011, but the song was actually released in 2000, which would probably mean that Lil Jon in the early 2000s did take Crunkcore to the extreme, which is something that 3 6 Mafia had created. Fast forward to about 2013 when Bones dropped a few singles. I can name one like Dirt, for example. Say you got them guns, but I've never seen you bang. Or when Suicide Boys dropped Paris in 2015. And horrorcore itself finally took off again. For me, I had been looking for that new sound in rap, and you could definitely tell after the 2010s that music was starting to get more dark again, especially with songs like Mercy or 50K Remix. So it's no surprise that horrorcore took off like it did. People were definitely looking for that new sound after 2010, and horrorcore was definitely the outlet for that new sound. Modern artists like Ghostman, Suicide Boys, Bones, APOC Crisis, and even San Antonio, Texas rappers Blake and Mateo all have roots in their tracks linking to what 3 6 Mafia started, which is heavy dark beats known as horrorcore. I keep saying that.
I look like a rapper, bitch, I look more like Allah.
Even Suicide Boys praised 3 6 Mafia in one of their interviews. I would say back in like 2016, 2017, I do remember watching that. I just don't think I'll ever find the video for it ever again. Now, one artist I haven't brought up in this video is Koopsta, who was very underrated, but from the underground scene was also very popular at the time. With the help of DJ Paul and his production skill, they created The Devil's Playground. And one song that I can think of that's been heavily sampled off this album is Voodoo Village. Just listen to this. Then compare it to Caution by Blake and Mateo's Son. Or Dope Dealer by the more mainstream artist Schoolboy Q.
whole damn throat. I got
They literally sampled some of DJ Paul's work, and that's very inspirational because what DJ Paul started in the late 80s and the 90s has caught on like 30 years later. But this isn't the only sample that was ripped from DJ Paul. There's also numerous videos on YouTube with the comparison of Suicide Boys and 3 6 Mafia and the songs they used to bring them to fame. For example, Riding in the Chevy. This was made by 3 6 Mafia in the mid 90s, and then compare it to I Ended Up Driving the Camaro Off the Causeway Bridge. This was made by Suicide Boys in 2015. Now, what you can tell is that there's really not a lot of changes in the song itself other than bass drops. And that leads me to the legal troubles that Suicide Boys faced with 3 6 Mafia. They were sampling 3 6 Mafia or DJ Paul's work so much that it ended up in a legal battle on who owns the rights of the songs that Suicide Boys had put out. And that whole thing is a little iffy because Suicide Boys had worked alongside Juicy J way before the legal battle even happened. So I don't know what the hell happened in between there. I don't know who pissed off who or what, but it's just a little weird. Now, this doesn't mean that Suicide Boys is illegitimate. Ruby and Scrim definitely have a lot of talent. I mean, Scrim alone definitely has a lot of production skill, and their new album shows that. But even on his own, like he has his own little singles going on, his songs are fucking bangers. They both have a presence that the underground rap culture needed, and people to this day try to imitate them just like the 3 6 Mafia. And I want to make one thing clear: horrorcore would have never been a thing without 3 6 Mafia or Suicide Boys taking it off like it did. So I'm not bringing any hate towards Suicide Boys. I'm just letting you know that the people who really started this whole trend was 3 6 Mafia themselves. But if you happen to like my content, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and this will be the end of my video.